So before I hand over to Amanda, my name's Scott Mayer. I am Head of Training and Community Work for Fathers Network Scotland. I was just saying then that I was introduced by a friend of ours to Amanda because she has a book club, our friend does, and it's a book that Amanda did that you can see in the background there behind her head. I won't go into too much details, but it helps explain about emotions and feelings to children with neurodiversity. And the reason that we connected is that 3 of my boys have autism. And I just found it really, really interesting. Plus, 2 of my boys are dyslexic. And Amanda will explain how the book works and how it helps children, particularly with dyslexia. So it was something that I thought was fantastic. She very kindly sent me the books, a series of 3 that I could go through with my boys. And from the minute I opened that book, I knew we had to get her on DADx to come and talk. We had a good conversation. We're very fortunate tonight. There's a lot of people talking about neurodiversity at the moment, but what I really like about Amanda is that she can talk about the academic side and how we can support, but also the lived experience and how it manifests in children and obviously in later life. So before I ramble on too much, I will hand you over to Amanda Peddle herself and let her talk for the next 40 minutes. Thank you very much for coming.
Oh no, thank you for having me. And it's actually been ages since I've done anything online. I did loads in lockdown online, and then we went back to work. So I'll give you a little bit of information about me to start with. My background originally, when I left school, I was a pain in the backside at school, actually, because I was bright and bored and easily distracted. So I went into the RAF when I was 20 until I was 30. And with that structure, I then came out and moved back home. And round about the time we moved home, my daughter, who was then 5, was diagnosed with ADHD. So I'd done some voluntary work in Girls Brigade primarily, and in my daughter's nursery. So I pretty much blagged a job as a teaching assistant because I just wanted the holidays off. I thought if I'm going to have to support this child in a specific way, and she's 29 this year, so we're going back 24 years when, you know, the girls were really not being diagnosed that well with ADHD because it was very much based around the clinical view of boys. And because of my experience in the Air Force, they decided that I'd probably make a good teaching assistant because I had good boundaries. And so I started on the Monday, and on the Thursday I was put in the naughty class because I was new, and it was the class that no one else wanted to go into. It was a DT class where they ran rings around the teacher. And I stepped in that room and I was in absolute heaven because I was surrounded by a whole class full of kids that I could really relate to from my school experience. And that passion just grew, really. So that was a real light bulb moment. And then I started to study. I did a counselling course, and I worked my way up as my daughter's journey went alongside. So I studied, she struggled, I studied some more, she struggled some more with different things. We were in and out of the health departments when they were really hadn't got a lot for girls, apart from lots and lots of social groups, which for girls who don't like being very sociable wasn't really very helpful and caused them more stress than anything else. And when she was 12, she was diagnosed with autism and lots of comorbid things attached to that. And around about that time, I started a degree in supporting young people because I was passionate then. By this time, I was a pastoral manager and a year manager. And with a real passion for trying to get people to understand the sensory needs of my child and how that impacted on her stress levels. But there wasn't a lot of research about. It was either that she had anxiety and depression, or it was just because she was autistic. You know, and there was a huge, the attitude really was, she's going to have to learn how to fit in. And my attitude and my belief, strong belief from very early on was, no, the systems are going to have to adapt to these children and provide them with what they need so they can grow and develop. So as a very oppositional child, that sort of became a bit of a well, that sort of became my thing, really. I became quite vocal in challenging mindsets around how you deal with these children. And by this point, I was a pastoral lead, I was running interventions, I had my own budget, and I still couldn't get what my child needed. And I was so frustrated. I was thinking, if I work in this system and I cannot get what I need for my child, how does Fred on the street access anything? I went to the head teacher, teachers were reprimanded, and it didn't make a blind bit of difference. And she didn't have her first positive educational experience until she had her first day at a university open day at 19, where she was fully funded for a full package of support. And she came out and she said, now I understand why people enjoy education. And by this point, I'd already been out of education. I did my degree, and I did a systemic course with the Tavistock, and I set up a business independently because I live off the southeast coast of the UK. I live in Kent, and there were just too many children I was dealing with on a day-to-day basis who were continually excluded, put in isolation, permanently excluded, sent to alternative provisions, where actually a relational approach would just have been enough. And especially children from very complex backgrounds that everyone was keen to label, whereas a lot of the time it was more of a trauma response than a neurodiversity. And at that point, it was then either one or the other, rather than acknowledging that sometimes it's a complex mix of two. So I came away and I went to work in a children's home because I decided the education system sucked and I really needed to go somewhere that wasn't going to make me so angry. And I was there for about a year before I realised that I just don't like systems. So it was actually a lot less about which system I was in. It was the very fact that, yet again, there were all these gaps in the systems and between systems where children were just disappearing and not being able to access support. So my Inside Out service was set up to meet the needs of children with complex emotional behavioural needs who were not in a system, and then schools buy me in privately then to work with the families, build a relationship, engage them, and do the neuroeducational work, which is what the books are based on. So what had come from what I had learned, something that really got my interest when I was studying, was this idea of the almond effect, the role of the amygdala in how we respond to the world and how the sensory impact triggers that, and we then respond with an emotional response. And this focus on the visible effect of the emotional response was where a lot of extra damage was being done with some of these children, because they were responding in the way that their body responded, and then they were being shamed because the visual behavioural signs were then being labelled as naughty, disruptive, challenging. And so I worked on the neuroeducational model that I then started to take into primary school. So I had a model that I was working with the older children to help them understand what their body did and take the shame and the stigma out of that conversation, so that they could have a conversation around what their body was responding to, whether they really were feeling like a threat, and have a slightly different conversation within the schools. And there were progressive schools. There were schools where staff understood to ask the right questions. But so where Scott comes into this is that I've written this series of 3 books designed for all children, neurodiverse, neurotypical, and actually parents, grandparents, and just about everybody going. Because what I felt really was missing, and certainly in my area, what I felt was really missing, and with quite young children as well, is one of the first things that children ask is why. And we're very good at teaching them 80 different emotion words and 80 different expression faces, but we don't necessarily teach the building blocks before that of why they happen in the first place and what the impact of that is. And obviously with older children, you can go into much more detail, but with younger children, you obviously don't want to affect their development, but I wanted a way to be able to have that conversation so that you would go even before a lot of the interventions that are used in schools and in therapeutic practice and you know, all over the place. So I had ideas for a book. My older program had slowly, the language had got younger, the presentation had got younger, the delivery had got younger, children were responding much better younger. So my journey was really sort of becoming surprised at actually how young you could have these conversations in a really friendly way, and try and get that sort of conversation going. And I worked for a year in a local primary school and ran a pilot with the programme. And the idea was for the pilot to inform how I laid out the first book. And I used to say to kids all the time, I'm going to write a book, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do the other. And I think towards the end of it, they said, oh, you keep saying this, Amanda, you know, all you keep saying is that you're going to write a book and you haven't done it. And without thinking, I said, well, it's really scary. And you know, 8 children went, hang on a minute, haven't you just taught us that that's just your body's way of highlighting something and actually it's not a real threat? So I really sort of felt that I've now got to put my money where my mouth is, because if year 5s are calling me out on what I've taught them, I really have no excuse not to go and do this. And my biggest fear is being visible. You know, it's very uncomfortable for me. You know, I have got a child with ADHD and autism. So, you know, it is highly likely that some of those traits are intergenerational as opposed to brand new. So I spent a couple of years playing around with it and doodling in a notebook, and then we ended up with Tam's journey. So I'm just going to sort of talk through the 3 books in a quite a basic way so that we sort of get through them all, but without boring you rigid. So the first book is The Beginning, and it introduces, I'm just going to move this down a little bit so you don't need to see my face. So it introduces our little man here. So this is Tam, and Tam gets very cross. I'll put it this way around, and he runs off into the woods. And he's so cross that he's not looking where he's going, and he runs into an almond tree. So the almond falls down, and he meets a sloth called Hetty. And Hetty then seeks to help him calm. So we're looking at co-regulation. And then she explains the role of the amygdala. Okay, the amygdala is the size of an almond, and it's a part of the brain that the cavemen used to help keep themselves safe, you know. And the amygdala and that part of the brain is informed by our senses. So the senses pass the messages through to the body. And if we think we're under attack, we may fight, flight, or freeze. And that's what we're supposed to do if we are under attack. However, we are very rarely under attack nowadays. And now we've got all these other things that we may have a similar response to, which actually is okay. You know, it's okay to have that because it's normal. And that's what our body is designed to do. So rather than go from the therapeutic angle that you are looking at something externally and placing the focus on what happened externally, you are taking away the power of the thing that happened and looking at your body's response to it. and having that awareness and actually acknowledging that as part of our evolutionary tract, that's sort of okay, because that's where we're at. You know, we've got this amazing, fantastic piece of brain that was designed to do a specific job that we now no longer need to do that specific job, and it's busied itself. You know, it's like your nosy best friend that has to know everything, that's me actually. I'm everybody else's nosy best friend, that has to be involved in everything. So we've gone from having hardly any sensory input and just using that sensory response as an emergency system to absorbing anywhere up to about 30 quadrillion different neural connections in a day. And our sensory system is trying to filter that at the same time as it's trying to do everything else. And of course, if you combine that with screen time, school pressure, the way we live, the excessive food, the wrong foods, all of those things, you know, it just adds so much more pressure to all of us, and not just children, and not just children with the neurodiversity. You know, it's every person on the planet is having these responses, and they are normal responses, they are expected responses, but they are adapted responses, and they have not adapted in the most helpful way. So it, you know, is the research is out there, but it takes about 50 years for research to go to practice. So my idea was, if I could turn this into a story, then children and young people would have access to that, and when they get in the positions we're in, they will be in a position to make more change. And this is their voice then that will make changes in the future, because they will have a better understanding. So in the second book, he's waking up and he's all quite happy chap, because he's thinking about what's going on. And but he's feeling better, because he's not quite so angry with himself when he loses his rag. And he's specifically cross in the first book because everyone keeps telling him to calm down, but he doesn't know how to calm down. He knows he should, but he doesn't know how to. So he's managing things better, but he's getting all this stuff going on in his body. You know, he's getting a tummy ache and a red face, and he's getting a bit jittery, a bit shaky. So he trots back off into the forest, find Hetty again, where she explains to him the function of the heart and the lungs, and how that works in terms of response. So when our body needs to respond, and it could be someone giving you a dirty look, and it could be someone coming at you with a machete, what happens is we need to move quickly, and we need additional red oxygenated blood in our arms and our legs. And what the body does is this amazingly clever system where it takes blood from everything muscle based internally. So the brain, the throat muscles, it's led by the vagal dorsal system that runs through your whole body, your autonomic nervous system. And it takes a little bit of blood from all of the areas that keep you alive, and it pushes them to the outside of your body so that you can react quickly. And as a caveman, this is brilliant, absolutely brilliant, because you react quickly, you don't think about it, you just do. The problem we've got now is that we're not responding generally at that level. We're not murdering someone for not making a cup of tea as a general rule. What we are getting is a huge range of physical symptoms that we're not necessarily recognising as an emotional response. And children certainly don't recognise them as an emotional response, especially children at school that aren't able to access school. Lots of sickness, lots of tummy aches, lots of sore throats, lots of headaches. And that's because their body is continually, softly going in and out of these responses, and we are as an adult as well. So in the 80s, there was a big thing about stress causing tummy aches, stress causing headaches, and then it sort of died off a bit, and we've gone towards the sort of neurodiverse way of looking at things, and now we've got trauma-informed work that's now becoming again more popular, and it's, you know, it's like nature nurture, it's a combination of all these things. But what a lot of the research is now recognizing is that probably 70% of physical issues that we have are caused by the overuse of this nervous system response. So lots of irritable bowel problems is because we're continually in and out of this stress state, this emotionally responsive state. And actually, children are much more likely to say, I need a wee, than I feel stressed. You know, they would recognise that quite early on, or I have a tummy ache, or I have butterflies. And certainly for neurodiverse children, and my daughter especially, those little cards with faces on mean nothing, because she has one expression and one face, unless she's actually laughing. So she just looks like she's got the from the minute she gets up to the minute she goes to bed. You know, she's a typical female autistic. We went through the goth phase, we went all through the dark phase. You know, she's a vampire child. She works night shifts, she Minecrafts all day if she bothers to get up, and she lives in a pigsty. So, but I mean, she's very well aware of her emotional response system. So we've got this sort of gingerbread character where they start to identify what the body's doing and why it's doing it, and how some of these body parts can play tricks on our body. You know, sometimes feeling sick doesn't mean we feel sick, doesn't mean we need to be at home. You know, if we're vomiting and we've got a tummy bug, then that is. If you only feel sick when you walk into a certain class, then that isn't. Now, if we stay in that state, what happens is we get too much oxygen in our body and we're not releasing enough carbon dioxide. So we've got too much carbon dioxide, too much oxygen, and then this is when we might get the shakes, get a red face, feel very stiff, hold tension in our bodies, you know, and that's when kids are like, oh, I feel dizzy, I don't feel well, I can't concentrate. And lots of children who are quite softly neurodiverse will experience a lot of this, and it will be misunderstood. Particularly demand avoidant, they will have every feel under the sun, and they will almost manifest that to avoid doing something, because they will place the focus on the feel in the body. And do you know what? I mean, I try and keep kids in school, but some school really isn't where we need them to be with understanding this, and certainly not in terms of sort of the physical responses. So we've got a little reminder there of the fight and flight response, you know, and then he takes himself off home then, ready to get himself organised. So all the books actually have a little back piece and a front piece from different organisations, which I'll go through with you in a minute. So the third book in this series is called The End with a question mark. And this then looks at, obviously goes back, you know, he's got a nice teacher now, he's really comfortable with his teacher, you know, he's quite happy that he's got other people to talk to, he's shared his knowledge, he's able to enjoy his walks in the woods, he's able to recognise that smells, sounds, things he uses his senses for are very soothing, but his teacher's going to give him some interventions and he doesn't know what they are. So Hetty comes again and explains that we've got around 86 billion neurons each in our brain, and they pass messages around the brain and the body. And if we can choose something pleasant sensory, then sometimes we can distract ourselves from this response system happening, because you can't actually use the system for two things at the same time. So, and this was really important to me because I work with lots of young people who get sent on little mindfulness sessions or breathing sessions, and you know, most kids with ADHD, unless you explain why you're doing it, that it's not going to have any relevance for them, and they're just not going to be interested. As well as a lot of children who are neurotypical. We place a great deal of importance in our education of teaching them how to tick boxes and why, but then not a lot of focus on why you're having mindfulness. And they did, you know, the research out most recently has found that mindfulness in schools has not been to be effective. But if you're not explaining to children why mindfulness works in the first place and the impact that the body has, then you're not giving any relevance to children, because they're not stupid and they understand these things and they're bright enough to have the conversations. So then it's just a little reminder that, you know, the neurons talk to the senses, inform our body creates a response, and that actually that's okay. That could be okay. What we do with that, there is responsibility around, which is why interventions can help. But it's more about a conversation starter that allows children, young people and families to understand that what their body is doing is a very natural process. Because most of the children that come to me, by the time I get them, they're using language like, I'm naughty, I'm a little shit, I'm not very nice. And that's how they are identifying themselves. And I find that really sad, because actually what they're doing is responding. And if they, you know, a lot of the children I work with, sadly, live in chaotic environments. They have parents who are not regulated. They have very fractured lifestyles, and all those things impact on the speed and the veracity of these physical responses. So then they have a bit of a conversation about endings. Actually, Tam's a bit upset. Does that mean now that I can't see you again? And Hetty is quite clear that, you know, there's no ending in terms of learning to know ourselves and our bodies. There's never an ending. It's a journey. It's our journey. It's our individual journey, you know, and we're all on it. And so he sort of then says goodbye. And she says, if you want to know more about how this comes about, then come back and I'll introduce you to a friend. And then so off he goes. And this little process has been, the impact it's had on children has been outstanding, and I'm really, really pleased by it, because it's an easy conversation. It's such an easy conversation to have with children. And not only that, the model I use is a neuroeducational model, where you're bringing learning, psychology and development together, and having something that was in a book format that would link home to school, health to school and home, and create a conversation where then I could take that information gathered from using the books and then help that family find a system they felt comfortable in. And some of the practical things is like Scott said, my daughter, as part of her autism, was diagnosed with dyslexia and then Erling's, and then we went to a kilometrist who said, no, she's photophobic, she's autistic, and her sensory process is oversensitive to light. And so he gave us a colour to use as the background, so that it would make it easier for children with any sort of visual stress, whether it's from dyslexia or Erling's or any other issue, would make it a lot then easier to read. So that's the books. It's not just me. I've got people with letters after their name and doctors that have written 4 words and little bits of information in the back. And we work closely with the Sloth Conservation Foundation in Costa Rica as well, because actually the sloth is if you look at from an anthropological point of view, the sloth has actually been around for about as long as us, and has been evolving and developing as long as us. And if it wasn't for man, the sloth's environmental system would be almost perfect. And the way it's adapted its body to get the best out of its environment is almost perfect. You know, they grow algae on their skin because they're slow. Some of that algae is used in tests for cancer treatments. They take 40 days to digest their food, and they take everything from a leaf, every single bit of nutrient. So they're fascinating creatures. And at the time when I wrote the books, they weren't trendy. So I did have the ump a bit when all of a sudden they got trendy and there were sloths everywhere. So we've got the books, and we've got over time we've sort of added merch, as my daughter would say. You've got to have merch, apparently. And my absolute favourites are these, and these are really great with the younger ones. So we've got a lung and a tummy and a neuron and a brain, and we've actually got a heart. So with the younger ones, it's really tactile. Children who, I didn't think nurseries would use it. Nurseries have been using them with their staff, so their staff can help recognise any regulation needs. And we're in the process of turning it into a really simple early years pack that can be used with the little ones. And then we've got a story back for schools. So our local virtual schools actually paid for 250 schools to have a set of books with the story guide. So we've got 2 schools locally, and the whole school has had the training from the head teachers all the way down to the TAs. They've either done the story bag training, or they've actually done a level 2 practitioner training, because we do a level 2 practitioner training guide as well. So Dr. Tina Ray is pretty big down here in terms of children's emotional health and development. So she does go all over the world, but she's done the forewords for those as well. And we've got another book coming out next. So the next 2 books are going to be looking at how these early connections are formed. So staying to the idea of these early books really look at that process of self-regulation and start to introduce the idea of co-regulation, safe spaces and safe adults. So the next book is going to be looking at where these early bonds come from, and why we make those connections from the womb up, why people feel safe, you know, because we respond to people in the same way as we do to other threats. Which is why sometimes you meet a person and you instantly don't like them for no other reason than your body just doesn't feel comfortable with them. And I still do it myself. I actually find that if I don't like someone if my body straight away goes no, it's highly likely that further down the line, once we've worked through that, they're going to be quite a positive influence in my life. But it's normally because I'm able to recognise that they're going to challenge me. And I don't want that, because I'm oppositional. So I don't want anybody to challenge me, because I just want to, you know, not ever be challenged. But I know it's good for me. But my instant reaction then to someone that is strong, that is intelligent, that will challenge me is like, no, like, you're just going to irritate me, which is a good thing, actually, because it makes us think and it makes us reflect. So the next book, and Scott's going to roll his eyes in a minute, I think you know this. So the next book is Tam's going back to the woods because he's got a new teacher, and the new teacher's making him feel really uncomfortable and he doesn't understand why. So there's a brief conversation about the fact that he can't speak to Hetty because Hetty's on maternity leave. So the next book is going to look at womb bonding. So he gets the toucan, who explains how the bonding works with, who explains how the real safe threat response works with people as well as situations, and how our brain is very quickly making those decisions without just taking a second, you know, to deal with that. So and then it sort of ends up with the conversation a little bit about having a safe adult can be really helpful, because two can regulate better than one. My daughter does that face, Kathy, every time I say it, and I've been planning this is 2 years in the making. This, so she's just no more, please, no more. So, and if two can, you can. See, she just gets better and better. So that's where we're at the moment. I was introduced to Scott, and really the link was my interest in dads and being ex-forces as well, because I think we're missing a whole target audience here in terms of dads, especially, you know, angry cross little boys who've got angry cross dads. You know, these are really sort of healthy ways just to read a book and have a conversation. And I mean, it's not, none of these things are a one size fits all, so they're never going to appeal to everybody. But I feel really lucky that it's done as well as it has so far. And we've just been, so we've been recommended in 2 books now, which is Beyond Behaviour Barriers and Beyond. And Dr. Minet Jean-Baillet has included one of our case studies in this book, which is the neuroscience of the developing child. And actually, she has written a course which can't remember which university, Shrewsbury College, I think it is, are doing. It's a level 2 and it's free. It's a free course. So I can send Scott the link for that. And I'm doing it at the moment, so I can write some recommendations.
Yeah, well done. Brilliant. Thank you very much.